Hello, friends, and welcome to Master Negotiators. I am Reyt. I am your host and a negotiation professor at McGill University in the Desautels Faculty of Management. Every week, I am joined by two negotiation experts from diverse negotiation fields such as sales, procurement, management, mediation, arbitration, and even law enforcement. And together, we deliver practical advice that you can apply in your work and in your daily personal life. And today, the topic is negotiation and diversity with a special focus on gender. As we get started, please drop a comment in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. You can participate in the chat. I will feature the best comments and we will answer any question you might have. So let me introduce today's master negotiators. The first guest is Svitlana Kalitsun. She is a trainer at the Negotiation Academy and a lawyer with extensive negotiation experience from top Australian law firms to multinational corporations. She is educated at the University of Vienna and Leiden University with further studies at Yale University. She has trained lawyers across Europe, India, Brazil, and Ukraine. Hello, Svitlana.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making time for us. And so our second guest is Glin Bayley. She's a negotiation expert and the mastermind behind Heart of Human. Glin offers coaching and workshops to enhance negotiation techniques, emotional intelligence, and leadership skills. Hello, Glin.
Hi, Jan. How are you?
Thank you so much for making time for us. What time is it for you?
It's 2 a.m. in Australia here.
I really appreciate it. And so just before we get into the question, as part of your name on LinkedIn, I see that there is an acronym, JAICD. What does it mean?
The graduate of Australian Institute of Company Directors. So it's a qualification because I'm a non-exec board director. My background was in finance, so I spent many years in commercial organisations, multinationals, as a management accountant before moving on into negotiation consulting and training and board directing.
Wow, that's amazing. And so let me go with the first question. So Svitlana, can you share some highlights from your journey in negotiation?
Oh, there are so many. Which one do you want?
Maybe what is interesting to you about negotiation?
What is interesting, it's shifting the mind of people, by the way. It's just what happened to me a few times today when I was training people to see how different the outcomes can be if they dig deeper and if they look for the interest of the others, not just think about themselves and their own skin in a game, but actually change the role and think about what can they bring to the table to the others, what can they give to the others. And as soon as people understand that winning is not about taking something from the others but giving them specifics, then it's whole different ball game. Absolutely, that's what makes me high about negotiations.
Yeah, thank you. What about you, Glin? Like, what gets you excited about negotiation? Oh, and by the way, I think we both have a dog on our laps. You have yours as well?
We do. This is Noah. So hi,
that's
everyone.
Amazing. Hello. Sherilyn says hi. Svitlana, you need to join the club. I don't know if you have a dog.
Yeah, I need to look for pet toys or something.
That's amazing. So yeah, Glin, what makes you excited about negotiation?
It's changed a lot over the years. When I first was trained in negotiation skills, I think I found it a superpower, and I'm going to say it naively, as a source of manipulation is probably the only word that I could best describe it. Not in a negative sense, but this ability to bend reality, perhaps. And as I've matured and my emotional intelligence has developed, I've also realized now that negotiation isn't just something you do, but it informs who you become. So it's a real skill that can help you define your own character and how you show up for the people around you. And to Svetlana's point around the ability to be an opportunity to give value, to connect and understand other people's needs. I think negotiation skills, I haven't found any skill that's more superior in terms of spending time really learning to listen and understand humans. So that's certainly why I love developing my skill and continuing to learn how to improve my mastery of it.
I agree with you that negotiation can be a superpower. It's so empowering to be able to just advocate for yourself, advocate for others. If somebody says something, to be able to, counter argument and just be a good advocate. It's really something you would think that such an important skill would be widely trained and taught, right? But for some reason, it's not. What do you think that is, Svitlana? Why is it that negotiation is not taught more widely?
Well, do you want the truth or do you want the truth?
I want the absolute truth.
I once asked a person from a university. I'm not going to say which country and what university, but
Okay.
maybe this person will going to listen, because finally I can say that somewhere. So I asked him, like, why don't you introduce this to this topic? And he told me, well, to introduce a new topic, we need to take an old topic away.
Right. That's interesting. So
It's like I'm
no,
pressing
I
my
mean,
case.
but that's an interesting point, and we do have the same issue at McGill University. So we teach negotiation, and we've added more and more sections every year because it's a very popular topic. But I've been wondering if I should petition for the topic for negotiation to be mandatory, to be a mandatory class. But the thing is, I don't really like when departments try to make classes mandatory, because then we're stuck with them forever. And, it's like it's this huge thing where you have to find like 6, 7 instructors to teach everybody the same thing. But I have to say, yeah, unfortunately, it's very, very common in universities. If you want to add more classes, you have to take some away. That's too bad. What do you think, Glin? Like in organizations, why don't organizations train more people to negotiate?
I think if I can share from my own experience, people think it's a specific skill for a specific context. And often it's assumed with the role of buying or selling, and it can be distinct in that space, or it can be assumed with legal conflict management, and it can be assumed in that skill. But it's not something people wake up thinking, oh, I'm going to be a negotiation expert today, because people don't recognize that it's something we're actually consciously and unconsciously doing every day. But because we've got these little distinct boxes around what we think negotiation is used for, if we're not in that direct context, the ability to think about human skill for communication, for influence, for advocating for yourself, as you said earlier, I don't think lands for people. And I think it's along with many skills that we probably should learn, like budgeting and emotional intelligence at a very young age, and learn to develop those skills. But it's probably, again, it's not a traditional core skill, even though it's something that influences our everyday life. So I think it's contextual, and maybe that's why people don't make the connections.
That's a really, really good point. And I think, there is a lot of research about differences across genders. Are people able to identify whether something is a negotiation or not? And I think, sometimes one of the reasons that's been advanced in the literature as to, why sometimes do women have a harder time negotiating is because sometimes they don't identify, and it's in averages, of course, but sometimes they don't identify a situation as a negotiation. So for example, a promotion, right, sometimes could be seen as, no, they just told me I'm promoted. But there is a negotiation part in it, which is, how much will I be paid? How much more will I get? What's the perimeter of my new responsibilities? But a lot of times, and I think it's valid across genders, but a lot of times people don't see, how important it is. Okay, so let's start. Today's topic is diversity and negotiation. And so we'll start with a question on culture. And so, Svitlana, I have a question for you, which is, what are some common challenges negotiators face when working across different cultures?
Let me start with the biggest one that I would identify, and that's different context. It's different meaning that people put into the words.
Right.
Because some people have very low context. I mean that good communication is precise, it's simple, it's clear. They express everything to the point, and everything can be also understood exactly as they said. Whereas the others have a very high context communication, meaning that they speak nuanced and layered, and everything is sophisticated, and they talk between the lines and expect the others to read the body language, to read the big picture, to think about emotions, to take a note how people are looking at you, like how bright they are looking at you and whatnot. So I think that's it's the magic of different communication styles and the magic of different communication in the countries, because it can be individually different, but it's so interesting how one person can say A and it can be understood completely different by others.
So what would be your advice to people who are negotiating with people from different cultures?
Well, as Glin has said, listening carefully and try to zoom out and see the bigger picture. No matter which communication style person you're talking to, it's better to zoom out and to understand the ideas of it. And the other topic is, in case you are working in mixed culture communication styles, then it's better to be as clear as possible. Meaning, like in the US, it's a relatively new culture, and they probably that's my understanding, my opinion. But I have an idea that if everyone it's a culture of melting cultures from everywhere, and if everyone would be talking in their own context and giving stories and things between the lines, and no one will understand each other. So I have a feeling that the more cultures mix with each other, the lower should be the context. If you say A, then it's an A.
No, that's extremely interesting. I'm writing this paper right now. It's a revision for a conflict management paper, and one of the dimensions that I'm looking at is individualism and collectivism. And I think it's interesting because if you're part of an individualistic culture, you make all sorts of assumptions about what priorities are, who should be your expectations, who should get what, and it's very different for a collectivistic person. So I think what you're saying is that don't make assumptions about what they're prioritizing, because you don't know. Like, don't assume everybody's like you, because they're not.
Absolutely.
So, Glin, let's talk a little bit about gender, if it's okay with you. Can you tell us what differences you've noticed in your career in negotiation styles between genders? So, men and women, what have you noticed in terms of differences in style?
Yeah, I guess I can probably talk to what we might see as a stereotype. So
Right.
probably to caveat that some of these won't be true for all
Everybody,
men
right.
versus women, but the context is general. Women tend to have a more collaborative starting point, I would
Right.
say, versus men. I've observed that we're happiest when we're trying to create outcomes for all involved and
Right.
are better at advocating for others, whereas male counterparts have typically been more comfortable being bigger talkers and more comfortable advocating for themselves than necessarily others. So as a result of that, women are displaying more fairness,
Right.
whereas men can leave fairness aside with greater ease. I think there's distinctions also around what women have to be aware of. And as I said, I'm talking men, women, and I'm aware that people identify as different genders. The recognition from my perspective also is that socially and I guess environmentally in a work environment or various cultures, the perception of a traditional woman's role within the environment also means that women are up against unconscious bias around how we should carry ourselves, and therefore we have to concern ourselves with our likability factor significantly more than I would say our male counterparts would. So if a woman negotiates in a way that affects her likability, she's going to come off a lot worse than a guy who was assertive, confident, and strong, and might come across like he's self-orientated and into his own needs, but he's still less likely to come off looking bad than his female counterpart. And I think there's sort of some of the key distinctions, along with also, you know, I feel women are more led by emotion than we are by logic, and our male counterparts probably the other way around, more logic than emotion. And I think, as Svitlana said, cultural, I think, will play a different part in that as well. You know, the individual versus collective culture we're part of, also the historic journey that women have been on in finding their own independence and voice will play a part in how well our negotiation abilities are perceived.
Right. So all of this is extremely interesting. I really agree with you that if you take an example of somebody who gets upset as a leader, right? If they're a man, I think they're likely to be perceived as like an alpha or some guy like, who's really strong-willed. But if they're a woman, in a lot of contexts, they're going to be perceived as somebody with anger problems, somebody who has issues. And I think it's, there's this cultural stereotype that women are supposed to be warm and motherly and protecting and all that stuff. And if you violate that stereotype, then you're punished for it, and it's one of the many issues. So a lot of the negotiation research is focused on gender. I would say maybe like 60% of it. Like it's a massive interest, about gender. And it's a little bit depressing because when you look at the literature, it's like every single aspect is a problem. It's like women, don't identify as much the situations. When they do, they don't ask as much, but they're also stereotyped negatively, by other people. I mean, it's like every single thing that can go wrong goes wrong, but listening to you talk, I was kind of wondering, Glin, it's a little bit of a side question, but it seems like if we were to pick world leaders, we'd be better off with women, right? Than with men. If we just follow the stereotype, we'd have fewer wars. Do you agree with that?
From a personal perspective,
yeah,
I would say yes. I think it was demonstrated quite strongly through the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, those countries that were led by female leaders had a stronger outcome in terms of less deaths, less I guess chaos in managing the situation and calming people's nervous systems around the fear and anxiety at that time. The Prime Minister of Sweden at the time, New Zealand, there was a number of female leaders that really stood out for their ability to calmly navigate. I think because the propensity for female leaders is to tend and befriend, if you like,
Right.
our nurturing, compassionate nature is going to be more concerned about the collective well-being rather than the individual well-being. So I think there's definitely that distinction that makes us more capable of being aware situationally of what we need to consider. I think, and again, these are all stereotypes. So, for any of the audience listening, please don't take this as, a black or white
Right.
binary
Of
rule.
course.
But I also think women will spend more time listening to understand rather than listening to respond. And I do
Right.
think, our example of recent history in politicians that are male counterparts haven't led us to any examples where we see they've demonstrated a level of compassion, empathy, understanding, and the ability to negotiate. I mean, frankly, if we were able to see their negotiation capabilities demonstrated well, we would not be in conflict or we would not be in war. And it's resulted in a use of force rather than a use of compassionate power. And I think women have a greater strength in compassionate power than defaulting to force. And I think that has something to do with the fact that we would be punished far more greatly if we used force than our male counterpart, because it's not seen as appropriate for women to be as aggressive or strong, and we'd probably be hung, drawn, and quartered if we carried our behavior in the same way as some of our male counterparts do in certainly the political field.
So it's interesting because so if you look at the business context, now a regular employee, will almost never be in a situation of negotiating once with someone and then never seeing them again. Like typically, they will see people again and again and again, even if it's somebody that you're doing a contract, you're having a contract with. Maybe you're never going to see them again, but they will see your colleagues, and you'll change companies and they'll hear from you. It sounds like the collaborative approach is much more efficient in these modern situations. Do you agree with that, Glin?
That's the way I see the world evolving towards, for sure. I think the pandemic played a key part in that. We collectively experienced something at a global level in our generation that we haven't previously in this generation experienced. And I think that in itself led to a fair amount of trauma, is my belief, around our own individual experiences of that time and our collective experience. As a result, I think the feeling of competition feels so much more harsh when, only a matter of 2 years ago, we were wondering about our humanity's existence, and I can get pretty philosophical about this, but I think there is a move towards more collaboration. I think in the world of social media, our connection, what once might have been termed to be the 6 degrees of separation, I think is much closer to 2 or 3 degrees of separation. I mean, our LinkedIn connections are global. We would never have been in each other's worlds without social media. As a result, to your point, JN, we can't hide, and our behavior and impact follows us. So back to what I said at the very beginning, why is negotiation so powerful? Because you get to determine who you is through the demonstration of your skills in this space. And if you're competitive, combative, manipulative for the negative, a way of leveraging really a superpower, then I think that carries forward, and people have long memories, and they will more likely remember your impact in the negative context than they will remember you in a positive. So for every 5 or 6 positives you'll do, there's one negative. But if it's the other way around, it's untenable for a person to survive in our current environment without the past or the inappropriate behavior catching up with them.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And so, Svitlana, I have a question for you. So, to kind of like segue from what Glin was saying, women, the prototypical woman would be a little bit more, collaborative. The prototypical man would be a little bit more competitive. Of course, you have men who are very collaborative, women who are very competitive. We don't put people in boxes, but there are cultural differences, or gender differences that are pretty stable. I have noticed, however, and I'd be really interested in seeing if you've noticed the same thing, but I have noticed that the younger generations, when I ask them, what's a good negotiation outcome for you, they're a lot more collaborative, it seems to me, than the previous generations. Do you also see a generational difference in how people approach negotiation?
I would say yes. I mean, I don't know that many people to say that exactly, but it's, young people. But we have an office at the co-working space, and it's a very dear one to my heart. And we've been there for many years. And it's Gen Z
Yeah.
around me. And I just realized that it's Gen Z in a conference, like happening in Austria in last autumn. Only because they were polarizing the millennials and Gen Z, saying that like millennials don't understand the Gen Z people and vice versa. And I was sitting there, was like, who's Gen Z? Because I was part of this whole gang and I was not understanding like the whole point. I mean, like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, what's Gen Z? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what's Gen Z? I mean, like, they all around you, they think exactly like we do, and they have adopted the things that we taught them. I mean, like, don't
Right.
take a no as an answer. Go get your stuff that you want. Listen to your boundaries. Communicate your boundaries. If someone's overstepping, be firm, be assertive, but get what you want, get what you need. And that was only when I was talking to a representative of another generation who told me that he was, by the way, and he told me that he needed to work in a toxic environment and adapt. And now he's trapped in a situation where he needs to adapt to non-toxic environment. And that was
Right.
actually my answer to this whole thing that is happening out there. It's just so many layers of so many different experiences. But I have a hope that we're going towards the more collaborative approach.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And so, quick question for you, because you're a lawyer. How would you characterize a lawyer's style of negotiation?
Man and woman.
Like either, like I would be interested in hearing men or women. Yeah.
A lawyer style negotiation. I think that they teach us at the law school a lot about the strategies of the law. So it's actually it's rather competitive. It is competitive, and it's an assumption that we usually get from the old. I mean, I don't know how if is that okay to still call it a school? No, let's call it a school. I have a feeling that by teaching us so many laws and so many regulations, we get competitive and we get to assumptions that I can solve it in the court. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see each other in the court, or let's put it in a document or something. And exactly the small step before that, I mean, like the negotiation part where you can actually like sort things out without any legal document or a judge, it just gets forgotten.
I'm asking you because I know a few lawyers in my work life and in my personal life. And, there is like something that I keep hearing, which always makes me laugh, but they keep always mentioning suing people. Like it's always going back to that, and I always tell them, I was like, dude, we're not there yet. Like, you don't have to sue them. Like, you can relax. And I always wonder, like, it's almost like the saying, you know, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail or something. I don't remember what the saying is, but I think that's what it is. But it's always funny because to me, litigation, I've never been in litigation. I've never been in a lawsuit or anything like that. But it sounds like a huge pain in the ass to like sue somebody and then have all sorts of paperwork. I mean, emotionally, it has to be extremely draining. But I guess, you know, if you're trained to resolve conflicts that way, it must look like the right way to go.
I feel that too. Yeah. Therefore, I changed completely from conflict resolution to prevention. Therefore, I do
Yeah.
negotiation because I feel way better. It's like it's way more fair to me if that you teach people not to have the conflicts. I mean, of course, the whole legal world is based on people having conflicts, but how about not having them? How about like I mean, like at least have them less? So that's the reason why I
Yeah.
do negotiation.
And I think something that's too bad in law schools, and I just know a few law schools, I don't know all of them, but you know, in management schools, we have a lot of negotiation about the psychology of negotiation. And so we really teach people about the psychology of negotiation and for yourself and then for others and how people might respond, how do you de-escalate and all that stuff. But I have been a judge in negotiation competitions in law schools, and it's completely ignored. It seems like they go straight into the litigation aspect, which I think is it's fascinating, of course. But there is the psychology, and maybe you can avoid to litigate, you know? So absolutely interesting. All right, so I think we should go into the scenarios, if that's okay with you. So let's move on to our role play section. So I will present each of you with specific negotiation scenarios, and I want you to fully immerse yourself in the role. Act out the negotiation as if it was happening live with me or with the counterpart, using the words and the tactics that you would employ in that situation. Once we're done, we will discuss the approaches that you took. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and we will take it from there. This is not how I want to do it. All right, let's do it this way. Perfect. So let me start with the first scenario. And so this is a scenario for Glin. And it's negotiating a raise in a male-dominated industry. A female engineer in a tech company wants to negotiate a salary raise. Despite her performance and contributions, she notices her male counterparts are getting higher raises. She aims to highlight her achievements and negotiate for equitable pay. So that's a really tricky one. And I know it's something that's really stressful to people, but it really speaks about unfair treatment, you know, unfair treatment just based on gender. So Glin, if you were to bring that up to some manager or an HR person, how would you bring that up?
Okay, I think firstly, if I can just talk to the context,
Sure.
a lot of people assume salary negotiations need to be done retrospectively after they've done their year and they've proved themselves.
Right.
And I'm a big advocate of have the conversation set up and prepared in advance so that we can avoid the at latter end justifying. So if I'm in this situation now, I'm going to assume that I didn't set up the conversation with my line manager around the criteria for success first and foremost. So can I rewind? If I pretend I was 12 months earlier for a minute, and then I'll come back to this scenario. If it's 12 months earlier, I'd want to sit down with my line manager and say, I'm really keen on being a high performer. On the basis of high performance, what will be the key criteria that I would need to hit in order to be marked up as a high performer, right? More than likely, your line manager isn't going to have a clue because most leaders are focused on the bell curve in measuring the team, and it'll be like, oh, well, we'll see where everyone lands. I would say come prepared with what high performance looks like for you and say, hey, I've had to think about what high performance looks like. If I achieve this, this, and this, would you agree that this would look like high performance? If so, great. I'd love to make sure that we're on track. As such, I'm going to sit down with you every month and let you know how I'm tracking so that we can ensure I and the team are not off track with regards to our expectations.
Right.
On the basis that I do this with you, at the 6-month mark, I'd love to have a conversation about my salary to align what I am doing with regards to the contribution that I am making. What we're doing is having that conversation in the setup. So at that point, there's no objection from your line manager because you haven't asked them for a salary. You've already focused on the value exchange up front, and you're saying, here's what I'm willing to do. And we've aligned on what high performance looks like. I might anchor them to a position around, hey, I'm going to expect a salary increase of X if I deliver this in line with high performance. We know that's still there for a later negotiation, but I've now set the scene. But in this instance, if I was in an environment where my male counterparts are getting a higher salary, and I found this information out and I'm at a disadvantage, what I'd found to understand was, what is the criteria by which salary increases are given in the first case, right? So get the data, analyze that data first, because if we go straight into presenting a justification, we're coming from a place of defense rather than actively seeking to understand what the landscape is. And it might not require defense because it might be a misalignment of expectations, which could be quite carefully presented when the information is gathered. And I think we often assume that there is gender disadvantage and disparities without first validating our information sources. So I would say, let's validate, in what conditions were the criteria for salary increases. Do you see a distinction between the role that I do and what my male counterparts do? Would you expect there to be a distinction? Does gender influence my ability to do this role well? Because you want to at least establish that your line manager first sees the role itself as a gender neutral objective and delivery requirement. And if you can get that alignment, then if all of the answers are yes, the roles are the same, the criteria is objective and not distinct for someone's level of experience, because I don't know if the male counterparts have been in the role 10 years and I've been in the role 2 years, right? So I've no idea what the context is. But if I can discern that there is a reason for the disparity and it does seem to be a gender disparity, I would then look to bring up hey, I know it's probably not expected that individuals talk about their salaries, but let's get real, we will. Right. And as a result, we've discerned that can you help me understand what reasons would exist for that to be true? Because again, we don't want to start accusing. We want to give someone the opportunity to give us information. The more they say, the more they give away in terms of context, and the more information we have to build a justification or a rationale that suggests that we are able to get an increase, the more opportunity we have to have a non-emotional but a rational, logical conversation that takes it away from me, but actually about the role and the objectives that we're trying to achieve. And I think in any conversation, whether it's gender or any other discrimination that might be occurring, make it about the object rather than you, so that people can look at it collectively rather than anchor someone's guard up is where I would start.
So there are so many aspects that I love about your answer. I think it's extremely insightful. One of the striking things that I've noticed advising a lot of students is I often get young women, sometimes also young men, but I have to say it's more prevalent among young women. They reach out to me because they have a job offer, and they don't really want to negotiate it. I mean, they kind of want to negotiate it, but they're hoping to find a way to not negotiate it. And so what they're saying, and it always makes me laugh, but they genuinely believe it's a good idea, where they say, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to negotiate it, but I will work and do such a good job that they will increase my salary themselves without me even asking for it. And so, of course, we, all three of us, we know it doesn't work this way. People don't give money to people who don't ask for it. You have to like keep an eye on it and say you want it. But what I really, really like about your strategy is you're also signaling to the supervisor that you're keeping an eye on your performance, and you're keeping an eye on how aligned it is to an expectations of being rewarded for it. So when the manager is thinking about who am I going to give, an extra salary, like a raise to, they're going to be thinking, well, Glin, we've had all of these meetings and we had all of that. Like she's like a hawk, like she's not going to let it go and then just like not even ask for it. Like she really is looking at it. So I really like that.
It's two-way accountability. And I think we can avoid a lot of disappointment if we start recognizing negotiation is about an exchange of value, and people need to know what that exchange is up front. It's like doing someone a favor, saying, hey, like, can you now pay me for that favor?
Yeah.
Even though I was generously giving you everything that I could to make you feel good. It's like, let's not do that. We've got to have the ability to recognize that we still live in a capitalist society, and there are rules of the game that we need to be aware of. And unless we're advocates for our own value, then, to your point, people aren't just going to go, from the goodness of my heart, I'm going to give you lots of money.
Yeah, it just doesn't work that way. Thank you. So let's switch to Svitlana and to the second scenario, which is also a scenario that I like, because I think it's a big issue for a lot of people. So it's about handling personal questions during interviews. And so a female candidate for a sales role is faced with inappropriate personal questions during a job interview, such as how many children she has and if she plans to have more. She needs to navigate these questions professionally while maintaining her candidacy for the role. So in Canada, it's illegal to do that. You can't ask people about their personal life and all that stuff. Doesn't mean that nobody ever does it. I'm sure people do it. And I'm sure they've developed ways to do it so that it looks like you should answer. They just say, oh, by the way, do you have any kids? And it's really tricky, I feel, for people to say, whoa, I'm not answering that. So how would you bring that up, Svitlana? How would you answer that?
Well, I have an advantage that I could have some thought about it while you were talking about it. It's actually the best answer is to make a joke out of that. So something like, I mean, like if they ask you how many kids you have, it's like, oh, I have 10 at home and I'm planning to have each year one. Or something. I mean, I still feel like making a joke out of everything that is inappropriate, that's the best solution, because people, I really feel that people just really need to have a little hint of that's inappropriate, and then they back off in a professional context. Yeah.
And what I like about it as well is, you can kind of like fake laugh, and they can fake laugh as well. And then you can just move on, right? Without answering the actual question. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the type of questions, if you're a parent or specifically a mother, I think, it would be wise to have an answer prepared in case people ask you that question. Because a lot of times, for example, one of the biggest questions people ask is, how much are you currently paid? Right? And people don't really have an answer for that. And so typically they just say it, which they shouldn't. Mm-hmm. But because they don't have an answer, they just say it. So no, I think it's very wise. Thank you. So using humor, you all sorts, whatever kind of joke works for you, just say it as long as you don't give the answer. Because
Can
it's,
I add
yeah, go for it, Glin.
to that? That'd be okay. My approach is slightly different, and I share this from my own experience when I was in corporate, and at the time when I was trying for a family and I was going for a role with an organization that I'd already been part of, but it was a different division.
Right.
I actually chose to share with them that I was actively trying for a family, and that I wanted to let them know that up front, because if that had any bearing on their decision, I would rather they know.
Oh,
It was get on the front foot for me, because I thought, well, frankly, they're going to know if I do conceive that I'm having a baby. So it's not necessarily something I can hide, but also from a value set, I wanted to work with an organization that actually was open to having adult conversations,
right.
and not be stuck in, the past of, hey, we've got to all pretend to get us an outcome and then move forward. And I think part of so I don't disagree with Svetlana's approach, because I think it's a move that you can make to give yourself comfort and to avoid what is inappropriate. But I think it's not just inappropriate for the fact that it's asked to women, it should be for men too, right? So there's actually there's a bias in the question in itself, because men these days are trying to have more equal roles in the family, and if we keep
absolutely
creating the condition that's the women's responsibility, then we're introducing bias in the way we're asking questions. But secondly, what we could also do is, in terms of preparation of the answer, is to say, I'm happy to answer that because the values I hold are one of working with an environment and a team that understands that my life doesn't just switch off the moment I get to work, that, who I bring to work is the same person at home. However, before I do answer that, I need to understand, does my answer in any way have a bearing on the role? And can you help me understand the reason behind your question, so I can best ascertain whether this is a role that's appropriate for me to even be in the conversation for? So you can put the question back on them without giving any information, but first get them consciously be aware of the potential for bias without being rude, without being offensive, without being defensive. But I think we've got a responsibility also to help see the world differently from the lens and the context, as Svetlana's previously said. Like, people have different contexts, so let's, positive intent, assume they're ignorant rather than genuinely gender what's the word for it, imbalance, maybe that's the wrong word, but rather than assume they're trying to catch you out, what if we assumed a positive intent, and how would we show up with integrity in that situation?
Right. Excellent. And I think, it's interesting, your approach. It reminds me when I was finishing my PhD and I was applying on the job market for professor positions. I had people very close to me in my work environment who were had really good intentions, but were telling me, JN, you need to cut your hair. Like, you can't go on the job market with long hair. And I remember, and especially when McGill flew me for a job talk, and you basically meet everybody and you give a talk and all that stuff, like, that pressure was stronger, where people were telling me, like, before you go, like, cut your hair. And I remember telling them, like, I'm not going to cut my hair because I don't want to work in a place that is so focused about hair. Like, what the hell? And plus, I'm a gay man, and if they're not okay with my hair, I mean, they're not going to be okay with a lot of stuff about me. So to me, it was really something almost like a test where I was thinking, look, if they're bigots, I don't want to work there. So, that's a cool idea. Thank you. And I really like that both of you have different approaches. There is no perfect answer that's valid for every single situation. There's different perspectives, and whatever speaks to you is what you should do. All right, so let's go. And so, Glin, we're going to go into the next one. So the next one is addressing an equal distribution of work. A female team member notices that she and other female colleagues are often assigned less visible, more administrative tasks compared to their male counterparts. She wants to negotiate a more equitable distribution of work to ensure that all team members have equal opportunities to showcase their skill and advance their careers. And in fact, there is research that was published very recently about academia where, part of what we do is service, which means run administrative positions and all that kind of stuff. And they were showing that a lot of men were dodging service and a lot of women really were bearing most of the weight of service. And so I think it's a really important thing to discuss, which is if you notice that a lot of the administrative tasks are kind of like assigned to women by default, how do you bring that up? How do you make that change?
I think you raise a really valid point about the invisible load that many women and not just women, but as I said, we can make a gender stereotype here, but
of course,
there is an invisible load, the load at home as well as the load at work, who's thinking about the grocery shopping, who's thinking about the kids pickup, who's thinking about, what clothes need to be ready for the holiday, the family are taking next week and who's going to pack them, right? So there's a lot of invisible load, whether it's at work or at home, that we can naturally attribute to the party that demonstrate the skill that meets that need, right? In a situation like this, as with every situation, my approach is always, please don't assume malintent, always gather information first, right? Because I think if we approach every situation with judgment, the energy we bring to the conversation is loaded, as opposed to from a place of neutrality in genuinely seeking to understand the situation. So in that specific context, and obviously we've only got a small snippet of a scenario without the wider history or the size of the team or what the gender makeup of the team is, etc. So with just this specific amount of information, I would be asking to understand what decisions were made around the work distribution and why. So notice the work distribution looks like this. Can you help me understand your rationale for that decision? As I'm trying to understand what criteria you used when you made that decision, right? Also, I would love for the opportunity to develop myself in this and this area, but because of my current workload, I don't have the extra bandwidth that I need to do X and Y. So is there an opportunity that we as a team can get together and look at how we can allocate the work so that each of us have an opportunity to develop, but also take the load of maybe the less popular activities? As I said, there's always there's a value exchange, and with colleagues and teammates, these aren't one-off transactions. They're not a one and done and I'm going to walk away from a negotiation. These are people you're going to see day in, day out. So getting to know what each of your team value, what they enjoy the most, what they're good at the most, and then looking at what's left might be an easier start point in terms of work distribution before you start then going, okay, well, now how are we going to divvy out the bits that are less exciting but actually are equally important in terms of the needs to be done. But I think any situation as we go on really requires your ability to be confident in understanding your own needs and the interests and needs of the other party. And I think unless you take a step back and and seek to understand, we're going to keep repeating the gender unconscious bias, or the lack of diversity unconscious bias, or just even the language people use and the choices they make unconsciously without realizing that's what they're doing. So I think if we can consciously start taking a step back, we can make a case out of gender neutrality, rather than keep perpetuating what could be an issue that's now spiraling because we keep repeating it.
Yeah, no, I really like this non-confrontational approach as well, not assuming negative intent, from people. And I think, so I'm a man, and I have this podcast. And so I try to feature as many people and as diverse as possible. But it's fair to say, and I think we probably all agree on this, that in the field, a lot of people in negotiation are men, and especially white men. And so that's kind of like what it is. But I have, over the past 2 years, I've received a couple of very aggressive comments, sometimes if I feature people, to say, what do you only feature men? Do you only read books from men? That kind of stuff. And to me, it's kind of like it mixes up two different things, because it's kind of like inferring that I would be sexist, and which is really not, I don't believe I'm sexist at all, but it's like accusing me of something. And then there's the second question, which is, why isn't the field more diverse, and why is it this way? So sometimes, I have episodes without women, and it's not because I'm trying to remove them from the field. It's just because I send my invitations to people, and then whoever registers, right? I have no control over that. But I agree with you that, kind of like accusing somebody of something that's very negative, which is to be a sexist, might not bring you closer to reaching your goal. It might just make the person reject your entire argument. Because I know when people kind of like insinuate, it happened a couple of times, but when people insinuate that, it just makes you want to disregard the whole thing, because I'm thinking, no, like, you're misrepresenting what's going on. Like, I'm not just reading books from men. Like, this is not what's going on. That's very interesting. Yeah, Glyn, do you want to say something?
I was just saying the point there is because people are hitting your sense of identity, and if you don't identify with being a sexist, and not anyone on this planet, I think, would consciously identify with being a sexist, at least not in the world that I operate in. And maybe I'm a glass half full, and I'm a philosophical person when I approach my life, but I do think we have to be careful about assuming what someone's identity is, because if we attack their identity, please do not be unsurprised if you get a defensive response. So don't come from a place of deep emotional identity attack. Address the situation objectively, drop judgment, seek to get curious, ask questions, deal in facts and truths rather than assumptions and assertions, because they can be very dangerous.
Yeah, don't tell people who they are, just
Exactly
ask them who they are. And by the way, like, if people think I'm not featuring enough women or diverse people, then suggest them, like, tag them, add their names. Like, that's the best way, because, like, I'm always looking for more people to feature. But yeah, so Svitlana, let's go into the last one, and then we'll close the show. All right. So the last one is advocating for gender inclusive policies. A female HR manager in a manufacturing company wants to introduce gender inclusive policies, such as parental leave and anti-harassment training. She needs to negotiate with a predominantly male senior management team to gain their support and approval for these initiatives. So how would you bring that up, Svitlana?
This sounds like a project, so I'll address that as a project. So I have like 4 steps. The first one is small steps, like put everything into order. And there is a saying, you eat an elephant in small bits. So it's
Right.
more or
Yeah.
less, it sounds like an elephant and you put it in small bits. Second is to document everything, because no matter
Right.
what surrounding it is, it just better stay on track. Third one is to have many conversations before big decisions are made. I think it's not a surprise to many of us, but it's just better to have more personal conversations. So less emails, more calls,
Mm,
more video calls than calls, more personal, just I don't know, knocking on a door and having a coffee, maybe a lunch or something, to express exactly what you need. And the fourth thing is the most here to me, because I feel, especially as a woman, you're not, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and we have many people in audience here. Uh, I have a feeling that women don't expect a pushback. And as
right.
soon as we experience a pushback, then it's a signal to, it's like you overstep the boundaries, yeah? And
Right.
other genders or other people sometimes expected a pushback and understand it as a confirmation for what they've done. So I would definitely advise a junior colleague of mine in this project by saying expect a pushback and keep pushing.
So I really like everything you've said, and I really like the structured approach. I think something that's extremely interesting as well is if you want people to agree to a change, right? You can't just organize a vote the same day you're presenting the change, because there's this status quo bias where people just don't want to change, right? So if they don't want to take a risk and change stuff and then break it, right? So I really like that. And I do agree with you that if you're expecting to have a big movement in a certain direction in an organization, you have to build that relationship by relationship, right? So having a discussion with somebody, explaining to them what you think, should be the new direction, getting their buy-in, and then you move on to another person. That's a really, really good one. And I also like your comment about pushback. You will absolutely get pushback, because people come from their own perspective. And a lot of times they're going to say things like, I don't think we need this. We already pay attention to that. It's just adding more bulk into our processes and all that stuff. So you need to really think. Something that a lot of times I feel negotiators fail to do is preparing for pushback. I always play the devil's advocate, and I always like to prepare them on what if somebody tells you that. But most likely somebody will tell you something that you didn't expect, and so you have to prepare it. I think it's very, very valuable, Svitlana. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. But circling back to what I've said in the beginning, that that it's fantastic to see if people have this mind shift of what they bring to the table. I mean, if you have a
Right.
person in a situation, what do they bring to the table of the others? That's work. That's
Yeah.
change. Change is painful. I mean, as soon
Yeah.
as you think about and put yourself into their shoes and understand, wait a minute, I'm doing harm. I mean, like, I'm doing work for them. I'm making work for them. You'll be arguing completely different. So that's empowering, I feel.
Yeah. And so I think, one of the ways that it can not look like you're creating additional work for them would be to align your project with maybe broader goals that the organization has, right? So that it doesn't look like you're just creating more problems, you're actually helping them reach their goals. Well, and you could see, right, how these gender inclusive policies could have great consequences in terms of retention, for example. Maybe retention is one of the goals of the organization. So I agree. You don't want it to look like, so you don't want to accuse people of something that they're not. You don't want to create more problems for them, and then also kind of like go one person at a time and try to get them. The good thing as well, by the way, if you go one person at a time, is the pushback, they will give it to you right away. If they disagree with something, it's almost like getting intel about what will people say when I'm presenting it to everybody, right?
Yeah.
But hopefully with your process, when you're presenting it with everybody, you've already secured the votes, you've already convinced everybody, and it will go very smoothly. Thank you,
Yeah.
Svitlana. What do you think, Glyn, of that approach?
I think the only area to well, not the only, there's loads, because there's so many different ways you could do it, but
Right.
it's understanding that it's not just the woman's policy. Like, again, it's like
Right.
we can only change the distinctions around people's expectations around gender if we make it like it's the human need, you know, as
Yeah.
humans, whether we're a woman, identify as female, male, you know,
Right.
gender, you know,
Fluid. Yeah.
neutral, fluid, you know, there's so many different ways people identify. And I think as a result, we've got to be open to that. This isn't just a equalizing at, you know, at one small segment or one large
Right.
segment. It's just about us as humans. Like, if you've got a
Right.
heartbeat, you know, you've got an opportunity for a contribution to be made. And does this meet everyone's need for, you know, parental leave, whether that's someone who's adopting a child versus someone who's fostering a child versus someone who's
Right.
giving birth to a child versus someone who's taking care of a child. Like, we've got to start looking at it as a more human level approach. And I think by taking that approach, we're naturally going to then invite, you know, who are not considered in this, you know, in this
Right.
context or situation and role. I think I think what scares me is just how far off we are. I think when I saw your questions for this interview, it did make me realize I feel like I'm in a little bubble of my own world where everything's good, because I've spent so much time thinking about how, you know, how do I make my life and those around me better. But
Right.
yeah, it does sadden me to see that there's still examples like this existing in the world, and how some companies are not as evolved as the experiences, you know, Svitlana and I have had in our careers.
And I think you're making a very, very good point about the fact that it's a human thing. You know, there is actually research showing that, you know, harassment doesn't have to be always men harassing women. You have female-dominated industries where the few men that are there can be also sexually harassed. And so it really is about equality. It's about equity in treatment, and everybody feeling comfortable. And I agree with you that, you know, if you talk about, for example, parental leave, you know, it's also men, you know, can do a parental leave. It's not just women. So yeah, unfortunately, you know, we have still a lot of work to do, I guess, as societies. But it's getting better, but it's definitely not fixed. All right, you guys, first of all, thank you so much for both of you. It was so nice catching up with you and exchanging with you. I really, really appreciate it. So a huge thank you. Please, if you're in the audience or you're watching this video, take a moment to connect with them on LinkedIn to continue learning from their experiences. Their LinkedIn is included in the description box. Don't forget to visit masternegotiators.live to register for upcoming events and to participate in our giveaways. And just remember, negotiation is a lifelong journey. So keep learning, and we'll see you next week on Master Negotiators. Have a good one, everybody. Thank you so much.